In the vast expanse of the Galactic Federation, where 1,000 species trade words like precious gems and silence is considered the mark of a primitive mind, one human dared to remain speechless. They called him broken, defective, a curiosity at best. But, when the ancient darkness that had slumbered for millennia finally stirred, when the Federation's greatest warriors fell like wheat before the scythe, it was this silent guardian who stepped forward. The sword he carried whispered secrets older than starlight itself, and, in his wordless presence, the galaxy would learn that sometimes the most profound truths cannot be spoken, they must be lived, fought for, and bled for. This is the story of how love transcended language, how silence became the loudest battle cry, and how one man's unspoken devotion saved not just his beloved, but the very fabric of civilization itself. The diplomatic reception hall of the Galactic Federation station hummed with the musical chaos of 1,000 conversations. Crystalline beings chimed like wine through cathedral spires, while the reptilian saurians hissed their complex harmonies. Ethereal voidkin whispered in frequencies that made the air itself shimmer, and the insectoid hive minds clicked and buzzed in perfect synchronization. Among this symphony of interstellar communication, one figure stood in absolute silence. Marcus Chan remained perfectly still near the refreshment alcove, his weathered hands folded behind his back as he watched the crowd. His simple black suit marked him as human, though most beings gave him barely a glance. To them, he was just another servant, perhaps a bodyguard for one of the more important human delegates. They could not have been more wrong. Ambassador Zaratiel of the Zenthran Empire glided through the crowd, her forearms gracefully gesturing as she spoke with various dignitaries. Her iridescent skin caught the station's artificial lighting, casting rainbow patterns across her flowing ceremonial robes. As one of the Federation's most skilled negotiators, she commanded respect from every species present. Her telepathic abilities made her invaluable in discussions where words often failed to convey true meaning. She had not spoken to Marcus in the 3 hours since the reception began. To most observers, they appeared to be complete strangers. Yet every few minutes, their eyes would meet across the room, and something unspoken would pass between them. A slight nod from him, a barely perceptible smile from her. These tiny gestures carried more meaning than all the elaborate speeches being delivered around them. Ambassador, High Chancellor Vextar approached Zaratiel, his scaled head bobbing in the Saurian equivalent of a bow. "I trust you are finding the reception enlightening?" "Indeed, Chancellor," Zaratiel replied, her voice carrying the melodic quality that made Zenthran speech so captivating. "Though I confess I am curious about your thoughts on the Outer Rim security concerns." Vextar's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "Ah yes, the reported disturbances. Primitive worlds claiming their colonies have simply vanished. Mass hysteria, most likely. The Rim dwellers have always been prone to wild fantasies." As the Chancellor spoke, Marcus's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. His right hand moved to rest near his left hip, where a long, wrapped bundle hung from his belt. To most observers, it appeared to be some sort of tool or ceremonial object. Those with more observant eyes might have noticed the careful way he positioned himself to keep it hidden from direct view. "You seem quite certain of that assessment," Zaratiel observed carefully. She had learned long ago to read between the lines when dealing with Federation politics. "Of course I am certain," Vextar's voice carried a hint of irritation. "The Federation's sensor networks would detect any significant threat in that region. These Rim-worlders probably encountered some natural phenomenon and let their primitive imaginations run wild." Across the room, Marcus had begun moving. Not toward them, but in a slow, deliberate pattern that brought him closer while maintaining the illusion of casual wandering. His movements were so natural that even the trained security personnel scattered throughout the hall paid him no attention. To them, he was background noise, invisible. Perhaps, Zaratiel conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Still, I find it curious that 17 separate systems would all report similar phenomena within the same time frame. The hegemony survivors described something quite specific before their communications ceased entirely." Vextar's posture stiffened. "Survivors? I was not aware there were any survivors from the hegemony incident." The temperature in their immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. Zaratiel's four eyes focused intently on the Chancellor's face, her telepathic abilities picking up the sudden spike in his emotional state. Fear. Guilt. And something else she could not quite identify. Oh yes, she continued smoothly. 3 escape pods made it to Federation space before, whatever happened to their homeworld. They spoke of shadows that moved between stars, of entire fleets simply disappearing without a trace. Most fascinating accounts. Marcus was now within 10 feet of their conversation, apparently examining a display of Andromedan crystal sculptures. His reflection in the crystalline surfaces allowed him to monitor multiple angles of approach to Zaratiel's position. His breathing had slowed to the measured rhythm he used in combat situations, though his expression remained completely neutral. Those survivors, Vextar said carefully, where are they being held for questioning? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Zaratiel's secondary eyes, the smaller pair used for peripheral vision, tracked Marcus's position without turning her head. She had not lived through 3 decades of diplomatic intrigue by missing such obvious tells. I believe they are in protective custody on Sanctuary Station, she replied, though this was a complete fabrication. The survivors had actually been relocated to a secure facility known only to the highest levels of Federation intelligence. Why do you ask, Chancellor? Merely ensuring proper protocols are followed, Vextar's forked tongue flicked out nervously. The Federation must be careful not to spread panic based on unsubstantiated claims. Marcus had stopped moving. To anyone watching, he appeared to be deeply absorbed in studying an intricate crystalline sculpture that depicted the founding of the Federation. In reality, every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring. His left hand now rested openly on the wrapped bundle at his hip, though he kept the motion casual enough to avoid attracting attention. Of course, Zaratiel agreed. Though I must say, the descriptions they provided were quite detailed. They spoke of weapons that could pierce dimensional barriers, of ships that moved without engines, of beings that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Quite imaginative, really. Vextar's pupils dilated to mere slits. You speak as though you have personal knowledge of these accounts. I make it my business to know things, Chancellor. It is what makes me effective at my job. The Saurian leader's hand moved toward a communication device on his belt. Marcus saw the motion in the sculpture's reflection and began moving again, this time with purpose rather than pretense. His approach was still subtle, but anyone trained in combat recognition would have seen the change in his gait, the way his shoulders squared, the predatory focus that entered his movements. I think perhaps this conversation has gone on long enough, Vextar announced. I have other obligations this evening. Certainly, Zaratiel smiled, but her telepathic senses were now fully engaged. She could feel the Chancellor's intent like a storm front approaching. Violence. Betrayal. And, underneath it all, a terror so profound it made her secondary heart skip beats. Though before you go, I was wondering if you might clarify something for me. What? How exactly did you know the hegemony survivors described specific phenomena? I never mentioned what they claimed to have seen. The silence that followed was deafening despite the continued conversations around them. Vextar's hand froze halfway to his communication device. Zaratiel maintained her diplomatic smile, but her 4 eyes had taken on the predatory gleam that had made her species such effective hunters before they had evolved into philosophers and negotiators. Marcus was now close enough to hear their conversation clearly. His hand had shifted to fully grasp the wrapped bundle at his hip. Whatever was inside it was roughly 3 feet long and felt surprisingly light in his grip. The wrapping itself was made from an unusual material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I misspoke, Vextar stammered. I assumed you were referring to typical refugee accounts. Did you? Zaratiel's voice had taken on a musical quality that her people used when preparing for either negotiation or combat. How interesting. Because I specifically mentioned that they described shadows moving between stars and fleets disappearing. Rather specific details for someone to simply assume. The Chancellor's facade cracked entirely. His hand jerked toward his communication device, but, before he could reach it, Marcus had closed the remaining distance between them. The human's approach was so swift and silent that even Zaratiel barely registered his movement until he was standing directly beside her. Ambassador, Marcus spoke for the first time that evening, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying absolute authority. We should leave. Now. His words sent a chill through both Zaratiel and Vextar, though for very different reasons. The ambassador had worked with Marcus for over 2 years, and, in all that time, he had never spoken unless the situation was genuinely dire. The Chancellor, meanwhile, suddenly realized that the silent human was not the background decoration he had assumed.
"Who is this?" Vextar demanded, though his voice betrayed his growing panic.
"My husband," Zaratiel replied calmly, though she was already beginning to move toward the nearest exit.
"And if he says we need to leave, then we need to leave immediately." Marcus's eyes never left the Chancellor as they began walking away.
His hand remained on the wrapped bundle, and Vextar could swear he saw something moving beneath the dark fabric, like smoke given form and purpose. The human's gaze held no anger, no threat, no emotion at all. It was the look of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome and was prepared for all of them.
"This conversation isn't over," Vextar called after them. Marcus stopped walking.
Slowly, he turned back to face the Saurian leader. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the immediate area despite its quiet tone, causing several nearby conversations to pause.
"Yes," he said simply. "It is."
The 2 words contained such finality that even the telepathically sensitive beings in the area felt a chill.
Vextar took an involuntary step backward, his survival instincts finally overriding his political posturing.
Something in the human's manner suggested that continuing this confrontation would be a fatal mistake. Zaratiel and Marcus left the reception hall together, moving with the unhurried pace of people who had somewhere important to be but were not yet running from immediate danger. Behind them, Vextar watched their departure with growing unease. The moment they were out of sight, he activated his communication device.
"Priority Channel 7, he hissed into the device. "The Zentharan knows about the survivors. Recommend immediate containment protocols." The response came back immediately, "Understood. Shadowblade assets are already in position. The problem will be resolved within the hour." As they walked through the station's corridors, Zaratiel finally broke the silence. "How long have you known about the Chancellor?"
3 weeks, Marcus replied quietly.
"About the real threat?" "Much longer."
She looked at him curiously. In their 2 years of marriage, she had learned to read his moods and expressions with remarkable accuracy despite his generally stoic demeanor. Right now, she could see tension in every line of his body, a readiness that suggested he expected violence at any moment. "The bundle you carry," she said carefully.
"It's not just ceremonial, is it?"
Marcus glanced down at the wrapped object hanging from his belt. His expression became almost sad for a moment before returning to its usual neutral state.
"No," he admitted. "It's not ceremonial at all."
They reached their private quarters without incident, but Marcus immediately began checking security systems and scanning for surveillance devices. His movements were practiced and efficient, suggesting he had performed such sweeps many times before. "Marcus," Zaratiel said softly. "Whatever is coming, whatever you haven't told me about your past or your purpose here, I need you to know that I trust you completely." He paused in his security check and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Gratitude, yes, but also a profound sadness, as though her trust was both the most precious gift he had ever received and the heaviest burden he could imagine carrying. "The Federation is not what it appears to be," he said finally. "There are forces working within it that serve something far older and more dangerous than any of the member species realize. Tonight's conversation confirmed what I have suspected for months.
The survivors from the Outer Rim attacks
were not the first. They were simply the first to escape and tell their story.
Whatever is eliminating those colonies is working its way toward the core worlds. Toward stations like this one." Zaratiel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "And you know what it is?" Marcus nodded slowly. "My people have fought it before. A very long time ago."
Before she could ask what he meant, the station's lights flickered and went out. Emergency illumination activated a moment later, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Through their quarters viewport, they could see something impossible happening in the space around the station.
Stars were going out.
One by one, the pinpricks of light that had filled the view were simply ceasing to exist, as though something was consuming the light itself.
And, in the growing darkness between them, shapes were moving.
Vast, impossible shapes that existed in too many dimensions for the human eye to properly process.
Marcus unwrapped the bundle at his hip with swift, precise movements.
What emerged was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It appeared to be a sword, but one forged from materials that had never existed in normal space. The blade seemed to be made of crystallized starlight, while the hilt was wrapped in what looked like solidified shadow. When he drew it fully, reality itself seemed to bend slightly around the weapon's edge.
"The Void Hunters have found us," he said quietly. "And now you'll understand why I've never spoken unless absolutely necessary. Some things should not be given voice in this reality. But this."
He raised the impossible sword. This was made to cut through the darkness between worlds. Alarms began blaring throughout the station as the crew finally realized what was happening outside.
But it was already too late.
The first of the Void Hunter ships was materializing within the station's defensive perimeter, having bypassed every known form of detection and protection. Marcus looked at his wife one last time before moving toward the door.
"Stay here.
Lock the door behind me and activate every security protocol you know.
If I don't return within 1 hour, use emergency beacon 77 Alpha. It will call others like me."
"Others like you?"
Zaratiel called after him.
"Marcus, what are you?" He paused at the threshold, his back to her.
"I'm what remains of humanity's first contact with the void between stars. And I'm what we became to ensure it could never happen again."
The door sealed behind him with a finality that somehow suggested Zaratiel might never see him again. Outside their viewport, more stars continued to die, and the shapes moving in the darkness grew larger and more distinct. The invasion of Station Meridian had begun. The corridors of Station Meridian had transformed into a maze of emergency lighting and screaming alarms. Marcus moved through them like a ghost, his impossible sword held at the ready while chaos erupted around him. Federation security forces ran past him toward the outer sections, their weapons charged and ready for a threat they could not possibly comprehend.
He could feel them before he saw them.
The Void Hunters existed partially outside normal spacetime, which created a distinctive pressure against his consciousness. It was like feeling thunderclouds gathering in your mind, a sensation that most beings interpreted as unexplained dread. Marcus had learned to read it like a map. 3 of them were already aboard the station. 2 more were materializing in the docking bays.
The largest was still outside, coordinating the attack from the space between realities.
It would be the primary target, but first he had to deal with the immediate threats.
Marcus reached the main atrium just as the first Void Hunter finished manifesting.
The creature was roughly humanoid in shape but existed in too many dimensions for most eyes to properly focus on. It appeared as a constantly shifting shadow with edges that cut through reality itself. Where it moved, the station's hull began to show stress fractures, as though its very presence was toxic to normal matter.
Federation security opened fire immediately.
Their plasma bolts passed harmlessly through the creature's form, having no more effect than throwing stones at fog. The Void Hunter responded by extending one of its dimensional appendages toward the nearest group of soldiers. When it touched them, they simply ceased to exist. Not killed, not destroyed, but erased from reality so completely that even the memory of them began to fade from the minds of those who had known them.
Marcus stepped into the atrium's central area and raised his sword.
The blade began to emit a soft, golden light that seemed to stabilize reality around it. The Void Hunter's shifting form became more solid, more vulnerable. For the first time in this engagement, it paused and took notice of the threat facing it. The creature's attention felt like ice water flooding his veins. Marcus had experienced this contact before, during humanity's first encounter with the Void Hunters 3 centuries ago. Back then, he had been a different person with a different name, serving aboard the exploration vessel New Horizon when they had accidentally breached the barriers between dimensions. The memory surfaced unbidden as he faced the creature. The ship's experimental faster-than-light drive had malfunctioned, tearing a hole in spacetime itself. Through that hole had come things that should never have existed in normal reality. The crew of 800 had been reduced to 3 survivors in less than 10 minutes. Marcus had been one of those survivors, though what they had become afterward could hardly be called fully human anymore. The Void Hunter spoke without words, its communication bypassing language entirely to inject meaning directly into his consciousness, bearer of the eternal blade.
You should not exist in this cycle of reality.
Your species was marked for consumption. Marked, yes, Marcus replied, though he did not speak aloud. His sword allowed him to communicate on the same dimensional frequencies the creatures used.
But, never consumed. We learned. We adapted. We became something you did not expect.
The creature's form rippled with what might have been surprise.
Impossible. The hunger devours all.
Nothing evolves beyond its reach.
Watch and see.
Marcus moved with speed that defied normal physics. The blade in his hands cut through dimensions themselves, severing the Void Hunter's connection to its home reality. The creature's scream existed on frequencies that shattered windows throughout the station and made every sentient being within a mile radius feel suddenly, inexplicably terrified. As the first hunter dissolved into component energies, Marcus was already moving toward the second manifestation point. The remaining security forces gave him a wide berth, their survival instincts recognizing something fundamentally dangerous about the silent human and his impossible weapon. In her quarters, Zaratiel monitored the station's communication channels while watching the battle unfold through security feeds. Her diplomatic training had not prepared her for the sight of her husband engaging creatures that existed outside normal reality, but her analytical mind was already working to understand what she was seeing. The sword he carried was not just a weapon. It was a focusing tool that allowed him to interact with beings from other dimensions. More than that, it seemed to transform him into something that could match them on their own terms. She could see it in the way he moved, the way reality bent around him when he wielded the blade. Her communication device activated with an incoming priority message. Chancellor Vexstar's image appeared, but something was wrong with the transmission. His features seemed to shift and blur, and his voice carried harmonics that should not have been possible for Saurian vocal cords to produce.
Ambassador, the image spoke, though she was increasingly certain it was no longer truly Vexstar.
Your husband has interfered with matters beyond his understanding. He must be stopped before he damages the great work.
What great work? She demanded. The cleansing. The preparation.
Your reality is ready for harvest, and the eternal hunger must be fed.
The barriers between worlds have grown thin. The time of consumption is at hand. Zaratiel's blood turned to ice. You're working with them. The Federation Council, or at least part of it, is collaborating with these creatures. Collaborating?
The thing wearing Vexstar's face laughed, a sound like glass breaking in reverse.
We are them. We have always been them. The Federation exists because we allow it to exist.
Every member species was guided to this point, cultivated and prepared for the final harvest. The transmission cut off, leaving Zaratiel alone with the horrifying implications.
How many of the council members were actually these void hunters in disguise? How long had they been infiltrating galactic civilization? And why had they waited until now to reveal themselves?
She activated the emergency beacon Marcus had mentioned, 77 Alpha. The signal would take time to reach its destination, but she had to trust that whatever help it summoned would arrive in time to matter. Meanwhile, Marcus had reached the second manifestation point in the station's primary power core. This void hunter was larger than the first, its presence causing the very structure of the station to phase in and out of normal space. Entire sections of corridor were becoming temporally unstable, existing in multiple time states simultaneously. This one was older, more experienced. It had been part of the original attack on the New Horizon 3 centuries ago. It recognized Marcus immediately. The last guardian, it projected. We thought you had perished with your ship. The ship died, Marcus admitted, circling the creature while looking for an opening.
The crew died. But some things are too stubborn to stay dead. You carry the blade of severance. We did not know any survived the final war. Marcus paused. Final war? Against our creators.
Against those who first banished us to the void between realities. Your species was not the first to discover our prison. They were merely the most persistent in their efforts to understand what they had found. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow.
Humanity had not discovered the Void Hunters by accident.
They had been led to them by some other force, some previous civilization that had fought these creatures and lost.
But why? What had they hoped to accomplish?
The builders left instructions, the hunter continued, apparently reading his thoughts. Hidden in your species' genetic code, in your deepest instincts.
You were designed to find us. Designed to forge the weapons necessary to fight us. Designed to become the final guardians of this reality. Designed by whom?
By those who came before. By the ones who first learned that the hunger cannot be destroyed, only contained. They scattered the seeds of their plan across countless worlds, waiting for one species to evolve the necessary characteristics.
Waiting for someone stubborn enough to turn themselves into living weapons rather than accept extinction.
Marcus raised his sword, its light blazing brighter as his understanding deepened.
Then, you know why I won't let you pass. We know why you believe you must try. But, you are one being against the infinite void.
Your blade may cut us, but it cannot cut us all. Eventually, you will fall, and this reality will feed the hunger as all others have.
The battle that followed shook the station to its foundations.
Marcus and the Void Hunter fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously, their conflict sending shockwaves through spacetime itself. To observers watching through security cameras, it appeared as though two impossibly fast shadows were dancing through the air while pieces of reality exploded around them. The Void Hunter's attacks came from directions that did not exist in normal space.
Claws of crystallized darkness slashed through dimensions to strike at Marcus from angles he could not perceive.
In response, his sword traced patterns of light that seemed to heal the tears in reality even as they cut through his opponent's defenses. As they fought, more memories surfaced. The experiments conducted on the survivors of the New Horizon.
The gradual transformation from human to something else.
The discovery that the Void Hunter's own weapons could be turned against them, but only by beings who had been partially assimilated into their dimensional framework. Marcus and the other two survivors had volunteered for the process. They had allowed themselves to be changed, to become living bridges between realities. It had taken decades to complete the transformation, and only Marcus had survived it intact. The others had either been consumed by the void energies or driven insane by existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He had spent the following centuries watching for signs of the Hunter's return, moving through galactic society as a silent guardian. His mission had been to prepare for this moment, to be ready when the barriers between realities finally weakened enough for a full invasion.
The Void Hunter made a mistake, extending too far into normal space while attempting a killing blow. Marcus's sword caught it at the point where its dimensional anchor met normal reality.
The blade severed that connection, trapping the creature in a space where it could neither exist properly nor return to its home dimension. As the second hunter began to dissolve, its final projection carried a warning: the Great Devourer comes. The one who first learned to feed on realities themselves. Your blade cannot touch it, Guardian. When it arrives, all will be consumed. Marcus barely had time to process this warning before alarms throughout the station began blaring a new emergency. Something massive was approaching from outside normal spacetime. Something that made the individual hunters seem like minor threats by comparison. Through the station's windows, the last stars in their local area were being systematically extinguished. But, this time, the darkness that replaced them was absolute. Not just the absence of light, but the absence of possibility itself. Looking directly at it caused physical pain, as though the mind was trying to process something that negated the very concept of existence.
Marcus felt his sword's weight increase dramatically.
The weapon was drawing power from his life force to maintain its effectiveness, and the approaching entity was so powerful that it required exponentially more energy to even register as a threat to it. He activated his own communication link to reach Zaratiel.
The primary target is arriving. Whatever that beacon calls, it needs to get here immediately.
Marcus, her voice carried across the station's failing communication systems. The Federation Council is compromised. They've been working with these creatures for decades, possibly centuries.
I know.
The question is whether any of the member species' militaries can be trusted, or if we're facing this alone.
The beacon is designed to call others like you, isn't it? Other survivors from humanity's first contact.
Marcus was quiet for a long moment.
There are no others like me, Zara. The beacon calls something else entirely. Something that was left behind by the species that came before us. A failsafe that was never supposed to be necessary. Outside the station, reality began to tear like fabric. Through the growing rift, something impossible began to emerge. It was vast beyond comprehension, existing in so many dimensions that looking at it directly caused spatial distortions. Where it touched the edges of normal space, entire star systems simply ceased to have ever existed. The Great Devourer had arrived, and Marcus realized that everything up to this point had been merely the opening moves in a game that spanned multiple realities and countless eons. His sword, his transformation, even his marriage to Zaratiel, had all been part of a plan set in motion by beings who had faced this same threat long before humanity had even evolved. Now he would discover whether that plan had any hope of success, or if he was simply the last guardian to witness the end of everything. The space around Station Meridian had become a battlefield between realities. The Great Devourer's presence warped fundamental constants of physics, making sections of the station exist in multiple time streams simultaneously. Marcus could see crew members moving through corridors that led to rooms from last week, while other areas aged centuries in seconds. His sword pulsed with increasing urgency as the entity's influence grew stronger. The weapon was trying to warn him that his current form would not be sufficient to challenge something of this magnitude. He would need to complete the transformation he had held in check for 3 centuries, allowing the void energies within him to fully manifest. The process had killed the other 2 survivors from the New Horizon. Marcus had watched both of them dissolve into component particles as their human forms proved incompatible with the energies required to fight beings of this power level. But he had learned from their failures, had found ways to maintain his core consciousness even while becoming something fundamentally other than human. Through his communicator, Zaratiel's voice reached him. "Marcus, I'm reading massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system. Whatever that beacon called, it's almost here." "How many signatures?" he asked while monitoring the Great Devourer's approach. The entity was still emerging from its interdimensional rift, a process that was taking considerable time due to its sheer size. 12 distinct ships, but, Marcus, they're not using any known form of propulsion. They're moving through space in ways that should be impossible. Marcus smiled grimly. They're not moving through space at all. They're moving space around themselves. Get ready to feel reality shake. The first of the approaching ships became visible through the station's external sensors. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, constructed from materials that seemed to exist in a state of controlled collapse between multiple dimensions. Its hull reflected stars that were not visible from any known location in normal space, and its movement left trails of crystallized time in its wake. As the 12 ships took up positions around the station, Marcus felt a familiar presence touch his consciousness. It was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons and the wisdom of beings who had faced extinction and chosen transformation instead. Guardian, the presence spoke directly into his mind. The time of revelation has come. Are you prepared to learn the truth of what you have become? I've been preparing for 3 centuries, Marcus replied. But I need to understand what I'm facing. The Great Devourer is larger than anything in the historical records. Because it has been feeding. Since your first encounter with the Void Hunters, it has been consuming the realities they have harvested. It is no longer merely a predator from the void. It has become something far worse. The ship closest to the station extended what appeared to be a docking tube, though the process involved bending spacetime to connect 2 points that were technically in different dimensional phases. Through this connection, a figure began to move toward the station. Marcus made his way to the docking port, leaving his sword's light to guide him through corridors that were becoming increasingly unstable. When the airlock cycled open, he found himself face to face with something that had once been humanoid but had clearly undergone transformations that made his own modifications seem minor by comparison. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, its form shifting constantly between solid matter and organized energy. Its face retained enough familiar features to suggest it had once been human, but its eyes held depths that spoke of experiences spanning multiple realities. "I am what you would have become," the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that existed in dimensions Marcus could barely perceive. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the exploration vessel Pathfinder." Marcus stared in shock. "Chen, that was my family name. Before the transformation. Because we are family."
I was your great-grandmother's sister, lost during humanity's first attempt to breach dimensional barriers 2 centuries before your own ship's mission. The builders saved me, as they saved 11 others from similar disasters." The revelation hit him like a physical blow.
The attacks on human ships weren't accidents.
They were tests.
Selection events.
The builders needed to identify members of your species with the genetic and psychological characteristics necessary to serve as guardians.
Each accident was carefully orchestrated to find individuals who could survive partial integration with void energies. As they spoke, the station shuddered under the influence of the Great Devourer's continued emergence.
Through the windows, Marcus could see that the entity had grown large enough to eclipse entire star clusters.
Its presence was creating cascading failures in the local spacetime matrix. "Why now?" Marcus asked.
"Why reveal this after so long?" "Because the final test has arrived. The Great Devourer represents the culmination of the Hunger's evolution. If it succeeds in consuming this reality cluster, it will become powerful enough to breach the barriers protecting the Builders' last refuge. Everything they have worked to preserve will be lost." Sarah led him deeper into her ship, through corridors that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions despite the vessel's external size constraints. The interior existed in folded space, allowing for rooms and passages that were larger than the ship that contained them. At the ship's core, Marcus found something that defied description. It was simultaneously a machine, a living organism, and a mathematical theorem made manifest. The Builders' final gift to their chosen guardians, a weapon system that existed across multiple reality layers simultaneously. "The Nexus Blade," Sarah explained. "Your sword was a prototype, a training tool to prepare you for this moment. This is what you were always meant to wield." The weapon appeared to be crafted from crystallized possibility itself. Its edge cut through the boundaries between what was and what could be, while its core contained energies drawn from the moment of creation itself. Simply looking at it directly caused Marcus's consciousness to expand, allowing him to perceive the Great Devourer's true nature.
The entity was not just consuming realities.
It was learning from them, incorporating their fundamental structures into its own being. Each devoured universe made it more complex, more capable of understanding and countering the defenses of subsequent realities. It had become a living anthology of everything that had ever existed in the consumed dimensions. The previous guardians failed because they tried to fight it as a single entity, Sarah continued.
But it's not one creature anymore.
It's a collective consciousness containing billions of consumed civilizations. To defeat it, we need to separate those consciousnesses, to give the absorbed realities a chance to rebel from within. Marcus grasped the Nexus Blade, feeling his consciousness immediately expand to encompass multiple dimensional layers. He could perceive the battle as it truly was, not just a conflict between his reality and the void, but part of an infinite war that had been raging across the multiverse since the moment the first civilizations had developed enough to breach dimensional barriers. "What about Zara?" he asked, though his expanded awareness already provided disturbing possibilities. "She is more than she appears," Sarah admitted.
The Builders' genetic modifications weren't limited to humans.
Other species were also prepared, their members altered in subtle ways to serve as support systems for the primary guardians. Your wife's telepathic abilities were enhanced specifically to help ground you during the final transformation. As if summoned by their conversation, Zaratiel's voice reached them through the ship's communication system. "Marcus, something is happening to the station. The crew members are beginning to remember things that shouldn't be possible." Marcus accessed the station's internal sensors and saw what she meant. Throughout Meridian, beings were experiencing spontaneous memory recovery. Federation citizens were recalling past lives and realities that had supposedly never existed. Scientists were remembering technologies they had never learned. Soldiers were recovering combat experience from wars that had been erased from history. The Great Devourer's presence is destabilizing the barriers between absorbed realities, Sarah explained. The consciousnesses it has consumed are beginning to bleed through into normal space. We can use this. On the station, Zaratiel was experiencing her own revelation. Memories that belonged to different versions of herself were surfacing, a reality where she had been a warrior queen leading her people against interdimensional invaders, another where she had been a scientist working to develop defenses against void incursion, and dozens more where she had served in various capacities as support for reality's defenders. All of these versions shared one constant: her connection to Marcus, or beings very much like him. Across multiple realities, they had found each other, had worked together to defend existence itself against the Hunger's advance. The Federation Communications Network began broadcasting emergency signals as similar awakenings occurred throughout the galaxy. Beings who had thought themselves ordinary citizens were recovering memories of being soldiers, scientists, and leaders in civilizations that had fought this same war countless times before. Chancellor Vexstar's image appeared on screens throughout the station, but the transmission was clearly struggling to maintain coherence. The entity possessing him was losing its ability to maintain the disguise as awakening minds throughout the station began to recognize it for what it truly was.
"The masquerade is ending," it announced. "Soon all will remember, and the great work will be complete.
The realities will unite in purpose, and the Hunger will finally consume the source of all existence." But, even as it spoke, the possessed Chancellor's form began to flicker and distort.
The awakening consciousnesses were actively rejecting the influence of the Void Hunters who had infiltrated their society.
The rebellion was beginning from within the Federation itself. Marcus completed his integration with the Nexus Blade, feeling his consciousness expand to encompass multiple reality layers simultaneously.
He could now perceive the Great Devourer's true vulnerability. The entity was so large and complex that it could not maintain perfect control over all of its absorbed components simultaneously.
The plan, he realized. The builders didn't intend for us to destroy it. They intended for us to liberate it. Every consciousness it has consumed, every reality it has absorbed, Sarah confirmed. They're all still in there, waiting for someone capable of cutting through the binding structures that hold them prisoner. The Nexus Blade can sever those bonds. But the process would require Marcus to enter the Great Devourer's reality matrix directly, to fight through layers of absorbed civilizations while maintaining his own identity and purpose. A single mistake would result in his consciousness being absorbed into the collective, making him part of the very entity he sought to defeat. As he prepared for the final confrontation, Marcus realized that everything had led to this moment. His transformation, his marriage to Zara, even his centuries of silent service, had all been preparation for a battle that would determine the fate of not just his reality, but, potentially, every reality that had ever existed. The Great Devourer had nearly completed its emergence, its form now large enough to dwarf entire solar systems. Around Station Meridian, the 12 Guardian ships began to move into attack formation, their reality-warping engines preparing to carry the war directly into the entity's dimensional matrix. Marcus looked back toward the station, where he could sense Zaratiel coordinating the awakening minds of the Federation citizens. Her telepathic abilities, enhanced across multiple realities, were helping to stabilize the consciousness transfers and organize the emerging resistance. He would not see her again until this was over. Either he would succeed in liberating the absorbed realities, or he would join them in eternal captivity. But, for the first time in 3 centuries, Marcus felt something approaching hope. The Builder's plan was finally revealing itself, and he was no longer fighting alone. The assault on the Great Devourer began with reality itself screaming. As the 12 Guardian ships breached the entity's outer dimensional barriers, spacetime convulsed around them like a living thing in agony. Marcus, now fully integrated with the Nexus Blade, led the primary strike team directly into the heart of the creature's reality matrix. What they found inside defied every law of physics he had ever known. The Great Devourer's interior was not a single space but, rather, an infinite collection of absorbed realities, each one compressed into crystallized probability structures that served as the entity's digestive organs. Entire universes had been reduced to geometric patterns that pulsed with the faded light of dead stars. "Stay close to the anchor points," Sarah's voice reached him through the dimensional static. "Lose contact with your original reality coordinates and you'll become part of the collection permanently." Marcus navigated through a landscape of impossible geometry, his enhanced senses revealing the true horror of what they faced. Each crystallized reality contained billions of consciousness patterns, civilizations that had been reduced to component thoughts and emotions that fed the entity's ever-growing intelligence. But, as he moved deeper into the matrix, he began to notice something the Void Hunters had not anticipated.
the absorbed realities were not truly destroyed.
They existed in a state of temporal suspension, their natural evolution frozen at the moment of consumption. More importantly, they were beginning to respond to the Nexus Blade's presence. The first liberation was accidental. While cutting through a barrier of crystallized spacetime, Marcus's blade accidentally severed the binding structure holding a small reality cluster in stasis. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Thousands of consciousness patterns suddenly awakened from their forced dormancy, their combined awareness creating a localized rebellion against the Great Devourer's control systems. The consciousnesses are fighting back, Marcus reported through his communication link. They remember what they were before absorption. Then, the legends were true, Sarah's response carried notes of wonder and terror in equal measure. The builders believed that consciousness itself was the universe's immune system against void incursion.
If enough absorbed minds awakened simultaneously.
She didn't need to finish the thought.
Marcus could already see what would happen.
The Great Devourer had grown so large precisely because it had consumed so many realities. If those realities remembered themselves and began coordinating their resistance, the entity would face rebellion from within on a scale that no external attack could hope to match. But the process was dangerous beyond measure. Each liberated consciousness cluster created dimensional instabilities that threatened to tear apart the local spacetime matrix. Too many simultaneous liberations could collapse the entire region into a cascading probability failure that would destroy everything, absorbed and free realities alike. Meanwhile, on Station Meridian, Zaratiel was discovering the true extent of her own transformation. The awakening memories from multiple realities had revealed that her telepathic abilities were not natural evolution but, rather carefully engineered modifications designed to help coordinate resistance efforts across dimensional boundaries. She could now perceive the consciousness patterns of everyone on the station, and, through them, she was beginning to sense the vast network of awakening minds throughout the galaxy.
The builders' preparations had been far more extensive than anyone had imagined.
Every major civilization contained sleeper agents, individuals who had been genetically and psychologically modified to serve as nodes in a galaxy-spanning communication network.
All Federation ships, this is Station Meridian Command, she broadcast on all frequencies. Code Omega protocols are now in effect. All personnel with clearance level Nexus or above, activate your secondary consciousness patterns immediately.
The response was immediate and overwhelming.
Throughout the galaxy, beings who had lived normal lives suddenly remembered their true purposes.
Fleet commanders recalled strategic knowledge from wars that had never officially happened.
Scientists recovered technological specifications for weapons that could affect void entities.
Entire planets' worth of civilians remembered training exercises that had been disguised as cultural traditions and games. The Federation fleet that had been approaching to investigate the disturbance around Station Meridian suddenly found itself transformed into something resembling its original intended function, a military force designed to defend reality itself against interdimensional threats.
Admiral Corinth of the Saurian Third Fleet was among those experiencing the awakening.
As his suppressed memories surfaced, he realized that his entire career had been preparation for this moment. Every tactical exercise, every deployment decision, every ship placement had been part of a vast strategic plan designed to position forces optimally for fighting entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. All units, he broadcast to his fleet.
Implement Formation Nexus. Target coordinates are the probability distortions surrounding the anomaly. We're going in to support the Guardian operation.
But, even as the Federation forces mobilized, the true scope of the threat was becoming apparent. The Great Devourer's presence was not limited to the immediate area around Station Meridian. Its dimensional influence extended across vast regions of space, and similar manifestations were beginning to appear in dozens of other star systems. The entity had learned from its previous encounters with Guardian forces. Rather than concentrating its attack in a single location where defenders could focus their response, it was manifesting simultaneously across multiple realities and dimensional layers. The war was no longer confined to one battlefield but had become a multiversal conflict spanning countless possible timelines. Inside the Great Devourer's reality matrix, Marcus had reached what appeared to be the entity's central processing core. Here, the absorbed consciousness patterns were not randomly distributed but rather organized into vast computational structures that served as the creature's thinking organs. At the center of this impossible architecture, he found something that stopped him cold. The core consciousness that controlled the Great Devourer was not a void entity at all. It was the preserved remains of the very first civilization to encounter the Hunger, a species so ancient that their name had been forgotten by every reality they had once inhabited. They called themselves the Eternal Witnesses, and they had made the ultimate sacrifice to contain the void's advance. Rather than allow themselves to be consumed normally, they had chosen to merge their entire civilization with the Hunger itself, becoming its controlling intelligence in the hopes of eventually steering it away from populated realities. For billions of years, they had succeeded. The Great Devourer's seemingly random attacks on realities had actually been carefully calculated to target dimensions that were already dying or uninhabited. The Eternal Witnesses had been using the entity's vast power to preserve as many consciousness patterns as possible while slowly starving the Hunger by denying it access to truly vibrant realities.
But something had gone wrong.
The Hunger had grown too powerful, and the Eternal Witnesses were losing control. The entity's recent attacks on populated realities were signs that their influence was failing, that the Hunger was beginning to assert its original nature despite their efforts to contain it. Guardian, the voice that reached Marcus was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons spent in willing captivity.
We have been expecting you. The Builder's plan proceeds as prophesied. You've been fighting this thing from the inside for all this time?
Marcus asked, his consciousness barely able to process the scope of their sacrifice. Fighting, containing, preserving. We have saved what we could, but our strength fails. The Hunger grows stronger with each reality it processes.
Soon it will break free of our control entirely. Then, why continue? Why not let the Nexus Blade end this? Because destruction is not the answer.
The Hunger cannot be killed, only transformed. It is the universe's way of recycling realities that have reached the end of their natural evolution. But it has been corrupted, made malevolent by exposure to the fear and hatred of those it consumes. The Eternal Witness showed Marcus the truth of what the Hunger had originally been, a cosmic recycling system that gently absorbed dying realities and transformed their component energies into the raw materials for new universe creation. A natural and necessary part of multiversal evolution. But the fear and desperate resistance of consumed civilizations had gradually corrupted this process, turning the Hunger into something that sought to destroy rather than transform. The void between realities had become a place of torment rather than transition. The Builder's plan was never about destroying the Hunger, the Witness continued.
It was about healing it. Restoring its original purpose by replacing its corrupted consciousness patterns with willing volunteers who understood the necessity of cosmic recycling.
Marcus realized what was being asked of him.
You want me to take your place?
To become the new controlling consciousness for the Great Devourer.
Not just you. All of the Guardians. Your entire reality cluster.
The Builders calculated that it would take the combined consciousness patterns of approximately 50 billion willing minds to override the Hunger's accumulated malevolence. The scope of the sacrifice required was staggering. Marcus would need to convince not just himself but his entire civilization to willingly merge with the entity they had been fighting.
To become part of the cosmic recycling system, guiding it back to its original benevolent purpose.
But the alternative was worse. Without intervention, the corrupted Hunger would eventually consume all realities, turning the entire multiverse into a wasteland of crystallized torment where consciousness existed only to feed an endless appetite for destruction. Through his connection to the Nexus Blade, Marcus could sense the other Guardians reaching similar conclusions at their own assigned positions throughout the entity's reality matrix. Sarah and her team had found similar archives of ancient knowledge, while the awakening consciousness networks throughout the galaxy were beginning to understand the true scope of what was required. There has to be another way, Marcus projected through the dimensional static.
Some method that doesn't require total sacrifice of our reality.
There is, the Eternal Witness admitted. But it requires a level of trust and cooperation that few civilizations have ever achieved. Your reality cluster would need to merge temporarily with the Hunger, long enough to heal its corrupted consciousness patterns, then separate cleanly without being absorbed permanently.
The risks?
Total.
If the process fails, your entire reality becomes part of the entity permanently.
If it succeeds, the Hunger returns to its original purpose and your reality continues to evolve naturally until it reaches the end of its cosmic life cycle. Marcus found himself thinking of Zaratiel, of the life they had built together, of the billions of beings throughout the galaxy who had awakened to their true purpose only to discover that it might require them to sacrifice everything they had ever known. But he also thought of the infinite realities that would continue to exist if they succeeded, of the countless civilizations that would evolve and flourish in a multiverse where the cosmic recycling system functioned as originally intended. The choice was not really a choice at all. It was a test of faith in the fundamental goodness of existence itself. The final phase of the plan required something that no military strategy had ever attempted: the coordinated willing sacrifice of an entire galactic civilization with the faith that they would emerge transformed but intact. Marcus stood at the center of the Great Devourer's consciousness matrix, the nexus blade blazing with energies drawn from 50 billion awakened minds throughout the galaxy. Zaratiel's voice reached him through dimensions that should not have been able to carry telepathic communication. Her enhanced abilities now spanned the entire consciousness network, allowing her to coordinate the mental states of every awakened being in their reality cluster. Marcus, we're ready. Every world, every station, every ship. They understand what's required and they've chosen to trust in the Builder's vision. The magnitude of that trust was overwhelming. Beings who had lived their entire lives believing in the solidity of reality were choosing to dissolve themselves into component consciousness patterns on the faith that a plan devised by extinct aliens would somehow restore them afterward. Are you certain? Marcus asked through their connection. Once we begin, there's no stopping the process. I'm certain. But, Marcus, there's something else you need to know. I've been in contact with the consciousness networks from other reality clusters. The ones that were supposedly consumed by previous manifestations of the hunger. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the void energies surrounding him. What did you find? They're still there. Still conscious. The eternal witnesses weren't the only ones to attempt this merger. Dozens of other civilizations have tried the same approach over the eons. They're all inside the Great Devourer, maintaining their individual identity while serving as part of its collective guidance system. The implications were staggering. The Great Devourer was not just a cosmic recycling system controlled by ancient volunteers. It was a vast collaborative consciousness containing representatives from every major civilization that had ever reached sufficient advancement to understand their cosmic role. They've been waiting for us, Zaratiel continued. A reality cluster with the specific characteristics needed to heal the hunger's corrupted core. Apparently, our combination of stubborn persistence and technological adaptability is exactly what was required. Through the consciousness network, Marcus could sense the presence of those ancient civilizations. The eternal witnesses had been joined over the eons by the crystalline architects, who had built the first stable bridges between dimensions. The void speakers, who had learned to communicate across impossible distances. The reality shapers, who had developed the mathematics necessary to alter fundamental constants of physics. Each civilization had contributed their unique capabilities to the collective guidance system, slowly building toward the moment when a species would emerge with the exact combination of traits needed to complete the healing process. Humanity, the collective voice of the ancient civilizations, spoke through the dimensional static. The builders of bridges. The speakers of silences. The ones who choose transformation over destruction. Marcus understood now why the selection process had been so specific. Humans were not the most technologically advanced species, nor the most telepathically gifted, nor the most physically capable. But they possessed a unique combination of adaptability, stubbornness, and willingness to sacrifice for abstract principles that made them ideal for this final role. What exactly happens during the merger? He asked. Your reality cluster maintains its individual identity while temporarily becoming part of the Great Devourer's consciousness matrix, the ancient voices explained. You will experience existence from the perspective of the cosmic recycling system itself, understanding the necessity and beauty of the endless cycle of creation and dissolution. And then? Then, you choose. You can remain as part of the guidance system, helping to shepherd the multiverse through its cycles. Or you can return to your original reality and continue your natural evolution, carrying with you the knowledge of your cosmic purpose. The choice would be made collectively, by every conscious being in their reality cluster. But Marcus suspected he already knew what the decision would be. Humans had never been content to accept things as they were when they could work to make them better. The merger began with a sound that existed in dimensions beyond normal hearing. Reality itself sang as 50 billion consciousness patterns began to dissolve and reform according to the ancient protocols. Marcus felt his individual identity expanding to encompass the experiences of countless other beings, while simultaneously remaining essentially himself. Through the enhanced perspective, he could perceive the Great Devourer's true nature. It was beautiful beyond description, a vast organism designed to ensure that the universe never truly died but, instead, continued to evolve and transform across infinite cycles of creation. The fear and hatred that had corrupted it were merely surface contamination, like barnacles on the hull of a great ship. As the human consciousness patterns integrated with the entity's matrix, that contamination began to dissolve. Fear was replaced by understanding. Hatred gave way to compassion for the necessary role of endings in making new beginnings possible. The hunger transformed back into what it had always been meant to be, the universe's way of ensuring that nothing was ever truly lost, only changed. Marcus found himself standing in a space that existed between all realities, where the ancient volunteers from countless civilizations had gathered to witness the completion of their eons-long plan. They appeared not as the transformed beings they had become, but, as they had been in life, representatives of the infinite diversity of conscious evolution. "It is done," the eternal witness spoke, and, for the first time in billions of years, their voice carried notes of joy rather than merely duty. "The hunger is healed. The cosmic cycles can continue as they were meant to." Around them, the Great Devourer's reality matrix began to shift and change. The crystallized consciousness patterns of absorbed civilizations were gently released, their original forms restored as they were returned to their proper place in the cosmic cycle. Some chose to continue their evolution naturally. Others opted to join the volunteer guidance system, understanding now the cosmic role they could serve. "And what of us?" Marcus asked, though he could already sense the collective decision being made throughout his reality cluster. "You return," the ancient voices said in unison. "You have served your purpose admirably, but your civilization is young yet. You have much growing to do before you need to consider joining us permanently." The return journey was gentler than the merger had been. Marcus felt his consciousness condensing back into its original patterns while retaining the expanded understanding of cosmic purpose. Around him, the reality cluster of the Galactic Federation was reforming, its billions of inhabitants returning to their normal existence with the memory of their brief service as cosmic gardeners intact but no longer overwhelming. He found himself back on Station Meridian, still holding the Nexus blade but feeling its weight differently now. It was no longer a weapon of desperate last resort but rather a tool of conscious cosmic participation. Through the station's windows, he could see that the stars had returned, brighter and more beautiful than before. Zaratiel was waiting for him in their quarters, her enhanced telepathic abilities now permanently expanded to encompass galactic distances but focused once again on their personal connection. "How do you feel?" she asked, though her telepathic senses already provided much of the answer. "Different. The same. More myself than I've ever been, but also more aware of being part of something infinitely larger." Marcus set the Nexus blade carefully aside. It would be needed again someday, when another reality cluster reached the point of requiring cosmic intervention, but, for now it could rest. "The Federation Council is requesting a full debrief," Zaratiel informed him. "Though I suspect they're more interested in understanding what they experienced than in filing official reports." Marcus smiled. "Let them wait. For 3 centuries, I've spoken only when absolutely necessary. I think I've earned the right to enjoy some silence with my wife." They stood together at their quarters viewport, watching as the galaxy slowly returned to normal operations. Ships began moving again along their trade routes. Communications networks re-established contact with worlds that had been cut off during the dimensional crisis. The business of civilization resumed. But everything was different now. The awakened consciousness networks remained active, creating a background awareness of cosmic purpose that would guide the galaxy's development for generations to come. Scientists worked with new understanding of the universe's recycling systems. Explorers ventured into space with awareness of their role as part of cosmic evolution.
Most importantly, the galaxy now knew that it was not alone.
When their time came to join the cosmic cycles naturally, they would do so with the understanding and guidance of countless civilizations that had walked the same path before them. Marcus wrapped his arms around Zaratil as they watched the stars. For the first time in centuries, he felt truly at peace. The Silent Guardian's vigil was over.
The cosmic cycles continued as they should.
And, somewhere in the vast spaces between realities, the healed Great Devourer moved through dimensions like a gentle gardener, tending the infinite gardens of existence with wisdom drawn from 50 billion willing hearts. The marriage of a wordless human and a telepathic ambassador had become something larger than either of them had imagined possible. Their love had served as an anchor point for the transformation of cosmic forces beyond comprehension. And, in the end, it was that love, multiplied across billions of conscious beings choosing to trust in something greater than themselves, that had healed the wounds between realities and restored the universe to its intended harmony. Marcus finally spoke, his words carrying across dimensions to reach every consciousness that had participated in the great work. "Thank you." In the space between realities, 50 billion voices whispered back, "Thank you." And, in the restored cosmic cycles, where endings and beginnings danced together in eternal harmony, the universe continued its ancient song of transformation and renewal, watched over by guardians who had learned that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through conflict, but through the willingness to become part of something larger than oneself. The Silent Guardian had spoken his final words as a warrior. Whatever came next, it would be as something new, a husband, a citizen of the galaxy, and a conscious participant in the endless dance of cosmic evolution. The sword rested in peace, its purpose fulfilled. The stars sang with renewed light. And love, in all its infinite forms, continued to bridge the spaces between worlds.